Okay. Okay, now we come to somewhat of a rare instance in these DC animated movies. All-Star Superman. And the reason I say that this is a rare instance is that for the first time, I can safely say that I really don't like this movie. I yeah, I just don't like it. I don't think it's very good. And I and there are a lot of reasons why. But the basic plot this time around is it's based on a what's this thing based on? It's based on the comic book series by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely, or quite or quietly, whatever. And yeah, another Grant Morrison movie or another Grant Morrison story. It basically deals with Superman absorbing too much radiation from the sun, or absorbing too much energy from the sun, and his body can't hold it all, and he is dying. He's eventually going to die. So basically, the entirety of this movie deals with him settling his affairs before he dies, while also having to contend with guys like Lex Luthor and whatnot. And one of the affairs that he wants to settle is his relationship with Lois. He really wants to take the next step with her before he passes on. Okay, so why don't I like this movie? Well, there is little to no narrative flow. And this may have been the structure of the original comic book series, but there are some things that just don't translate well to film. And first of all, like I said, this has no semblance of narrative flow. You can tell where each issue of the comic book begins and where each issue ends. And the conflicts in each issue are almost completely unrelated. Like one issue deals with Superman getting into a contest with two guys named Samson and Atlas for Lois's affections. Okay, and then another issue might have him going to prison to interview Lex Luthor and getting into a fight with Parasite. Okay, then another issue might have him deal with these two long lost Kryptonians who who are trying to take over his stewardship of Earth. Okay, I mean, it's just all of these are just so random. You don't really feel like this movie is telling one cohesive story aside from the fact that Superman is dying. But even that, a lot of the time, seems to fade into the background. I mean, when I heard the premise of this movie, I was like, oh, okay, so it's going to be kind of this big send-off feature, like Godzilla versus Destroya. Not really sure how many people have seen that movie, but I don't know, it's the first thing that popped into my head, because that movie kind of dealt with a similar subject matter in that Godzilla was finally feeling some of the effects of the nuclear radiation that created him, and he was basically going to be the cause. His body was basically going to be one big nuclear meltdown. So you can see how I would draw similarities between the two. But honestly, this aside from having a very disjointed, very very jarring narrative, there are also very jarring shifts in tone. And this may have something to do. This is another thing where I think the original comic was better than the movie. I haven't read the original comic, so I wouldn't know, but the style of this, by its very nature, is very zany, very almost cartoonish. I'm not talking about the character designs. The character designs are relatively without any silliness. But I'm talking about how a lot of the concepts that are presented here are very over the top, very kind of out there. Like like Superman creating a serum that gives Lois superpowers for one day, or Superman getting into a fight with some, I don't know, Egyptian sphinx some Anubis looking guy. It's and they're trying to tie all this in, or they're trying to tie all this in with Superman dying, and it just does not mesh. It does not cohere. I had no idea what to feel during this movie. Should I feel sad? Well, the end of the movie, the last 10 minutes, wanted me to feel sad. So yeah, for the most part, one of the main reason I don't like this one is because I just didn't know what to make of it. It's just not. It's not an even experience. I mean, fundamentally, it is just so uneven that it's not. I didn't find it to be a very pleasant experience. I mean, Superman dying. I mean, obviously, that's been dealt with before in these animated movies with Superman Doomsday. But Superman dying and trying to mesh that all in with the silliness of the concepts I just mentioned, and the randomness of the concepts I just mentioned, doesn't really allow you to tell the randomness in which these events happen, and how they're just kind of quickly resolved. Each of them are just kind of quickly resolved in 10 minutes, kind of like comic book issues, like separate issues of one encompassing comic book story arc. It doesn't really lend itself to a movie all that well, because with a movie you're only supposed to tell one story. I mean, yeah, you can have different facets and different aspects from which to tell that story, but you don't tell like mini plot. I mean, that's not how movies work. I mean, unless you're doing an anthology movie, and in that case, it's a little more tolerable. But here, this is not an anthology movie. This is supposed to be Superman's last days on the planet, and we're not allowed to really gravitate toward that because we're being jerked around into all these other little mini plots. The voice acting is basically up to their usual standards, I will admit. Although it's probably one of the least impressive of the cast that they've assembled. Because James Denton and Christina Hendricks as Superman and Lois Lane, they're fine. They each do a good job. But I'm not really in any hurry to see them as these characters again. I would almost argue that Christina Hendricks is a little miscast as Lois Lane. Or, well, she is and she isn't. Because she has kind of the pluckiness of Lois Lane. She has the high energy that the character requires, but she doesn't really seem to have all that much professionalism. This doesn't really seem like the type of person who would be able to win a Pulitzer Prize. A lot of the time she's just kind of sidelined. And a lot of the time she just seems kind of almost like a valley girl. And again, I'm not really blaming Christina Hendricks all that much. She might have been wrong for the parts. Although, again, she and James Denton do a good job. James Denton fares better as Superman because at least he captures the sides of Superman better than Christina Hendricks does with Lois Lane. But again, I'm not really in any hurry to see either of these guys voice these characters again. Like I said, they were fine, but they were nothing special. The best part about this movie is Anthony LaPaglia as Lex Luthor, and this is a little bit more of what I wanted to see out of James Marsters in Superman Doomsday, because Anthony LaPaglia, he has the power, he has the brutality of Lex Luthor, but also you can tell that he's a genius. You can tell that he's almost always one step ahead of his enemies. While at the same time he adds his own unique bit of gruff to the character. He adds his own little bit of I'm trying to think of the right word aside from gruff, because that's gruff and gravel. That's he adds just a tiny bit of gravel to Superman, to Lex Luthor's voice, but not so much that you can't recognize the character. Not so much that it sounds like I don't know, Nick Nolte. But yeah, he was very good. Like I said, he was the best part of the movie in terms of the voice acting. He did a really good job, and I wouldn't mind seeing him again as Lex Luthor, or hearing him again as Lex Luthor in the future. Edward Asner as Perry White, Linda Cardellini as Nastalia Luthor. Again, they were fine in their roles, but they didn't really add anything to the plot. You could have just cast this as a traditional. You could have cast these parts as traditional voice actors, and I don't really think people would have noticed a difference. Like I said, they don't do a bad job or anything. There aren't really any bad performances in this movie. It's just that I have to question casting Linda Cardellini in what ultimately amounts to almost a bit part. A very minor character. Basically kind of a female goth version of the John Cryer character from Superman 4. I hate to draw up painful memories of Superman 4, but there you go. But again, they don't do a bad job, and yeah, that's about all I got for All-Star Superman, aside from mentioning the animation, which is up to its usual, which they're up to their usual standards of animation. And one thing I have noticed in all these animated movies is that the animation constantly gets, well, I don't want to say it gets better, but they do seem to be I'm trying to think of the right phrase. Well, they seem to be finding a bit of a niche. They do seem to be, it seems like they are, I'm blanking. The animation is still good. It's still up to their usual standards. It still flows smoothly. The action scenes, or what action scenes there are still very good. They're still very well animated. So yeah, I don't really know what else I have. I mean, really, the story is where this movie really falls apart, and just again having very little in the way of narrative flow or tonal consistency. But aside from that, the voice acting is good, with one exception being great. The animation is good, but again, I just could not overlook the glaring issues in the story and in the tone. So I'm sorry if I offended any fans of this story, and if you like this movie, great, but I just could not get into it.